Hi, it's Dennis Daly. A couple of decades ago, I did one of my drives across the U.S., this time with my colleague Bill Clough. I was helping him move. I plotted out the trip and realized that along the way was a place called Bays Mountain State Park in southern Virginia, nearly into Tennessee. I wanted to stop there because they said if I did, they would get the wolves to howl for me. Well, hi, everybody. We're on the road again this week, and right now we're tromping through the leaves in an area just north of the Great Smoky Mountains. We are outside of Kingsport, Tennessee, at the Bays Mountain Park. This is indeed a beautiful part of the world, and before this program is over, we're going to try to get the wolves to howl for you. My host here at Bays Mountain is Ken Childress. He's one of the naturalists. He's an employee of the U.S. Park Service. I wanted to know what reaction he has seen from people who come to this beautiful park, this beautiful out-of-the-way part of America, especially if they're from the big city.
We do get a lot of visitors from other parts of the country. And, for example, we had a lady and her daughter down here about a week ago. They came up and visited the park and seemed to be quite taken with the scenery and the trees and the lake and that sort of thing.
Now, how'd you get involved in this? Did you always want to do this from the time you were a kid? Did you want to be a shoe salesman? Or?
Actually, I didn't, but I've worked here about 21 years, and actually when I first started, I worked in the planetarium here at the park, and then about a year and a half after that, I became one of the naturalists, which kind of went along with my schooling because I have a degree in biology.
Oh, wow. You know, I guess we should point out the difference. You have both an observatory and a planetarium here?
Yes, and a lot of people don't realize what the difference is. The planetarium is the indoor star theater, which is kind of like a round movie theater with a domed ceiling with a projector in the middle that simulates the night sky.
Oh, wow. And, of course, an observatory, you have the telescope.
An observatory is actually a building with telescopes in them, and we have a couple of observatories here with different types of telescopes. One has a refracting telescope and one has a reflecting telescope.
Well, I would think that one of the advantages of being here, not only you're up high, but unlike some planetariums, or is it planetaria, in which you've had urban sprawl encroach, I'm thinking of the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, where you now have a lot of city lights. You don't have that light pollution up here trying to look up into the sky that you have in a lot of places.
Well, we have a little bit because we're sort of close to Kingsport. But it's not really bad, and we are up on top of a mountain, and actually part of the mountain shields us from most of the light pollution, so it is a good place to do observing.
Now, you say you're a biologist. Are there plants here that are peculiar to this part of America? Are we going to see, if we visit here, some things that you're not going to see, for example, out in California?
Yeah, we have pretty much a typical ecosystem that you would find up and down the Appalachian Mountains. This area would be similar to western North Carolina, southwestern Virginia, similar to, say, western Pennsylvania or West Virginia, that type area.
You know, you do have one situation here which gives me heart. When I grew up in the Midwest, we always had this debate every fall. Do you rake the leaves or do you leave them? Let me walk over here and trot through some of this. Your leaves are still here from last fall, but of course if you had to rake this place, it would take a small army.
Well, they're still here because we have about 3,000 acres in the park. So far, we've not found anybody that can rake that many leaves.
But is it not true, though, that the decaying vegetation is actually good for it?
Yes. You know, even people who have leaves at home, if I know a lot of people like to have a tidy yard and rake up the leaves, but if you can leave some of the leaves or even just leave them in the yard over the winter and then clean them up in the spring, it really provides a lot of nutrients for your soil.
So if there's somebody listening to this and the next time their mom or dad says, go out and rake the leaves, we can quote you?
Yes, that'd be a good excuse not to rake the leaves.
Where do you want to walk to, Ken? We have about a half hour here to kind of sample the sites. Give us just an overview of what's here.
Well, we have the Nature Center with the planetarium and the various natural history exhibits. We have some native animal habitats that are close to the Nature Center, and perhaps we can visit them first. And we definitely want to go down and spend some time by the lake and see it, because that's what most people identify with Bays Mountain Park. The lake's been here a long time. It's the old reservoir that used to supply water to the city of Kingsport.
So we're up at about what elevation? How high above Kingsport here?
We're about 600 to 700 feet above Kingsport.
Okay. And the elevation here itself, do you know?
It's about 1,800 feet roughly. The highest point in the park is about 600 feet taller than where we are now.
Let's head out. Which way do you want to go first?
Let's go down this trail over here.
I noticed also, and I love the fact you have an awful lot of kids here. You have a lot of school tours come in?
We've got about 3 or 4 schools here today. Sometimes as many as 10 or 12 school groups here each day.
What is this area like in the winter? Are we high enough in elevation that we're going to get a lot of snow up here? How does winter have an impact on this area?
We get some snow, and sometimes we get a little more snow than the surrounding low-lying areas, but for the most part, snow is kind of a rare thing.
Interesting. Now, we're just beginning over here to get a view of the, if we can turn our cameras. That's one thing I don't like about radio. You can't see through the trees. This is is this spring-fed? Where does the water for this lake come from?
It has 2 sources. There are springs that come up into the lake and feed it, and a lot of that is just simply runoff from rain. We call this Bays Mountain Park, and people think that when you come up here you're on top of a mountain, but actually most of the park is in a little valley in between 2 ridges. The one that we're standing at the base of is called a Bays Mountain or Bays Ridge, and you can see, I think if you peek through the trees, that there's another ridge on the other side of the lake which is called River Mountain. So actually the park is in this little valley in between these 2 ridges.
You can go ahead and call it a holler.
Can I? Most people around here call it.
I remember the movie Coal Miner's Daughter. Loretta Lynn was from Butcher Holler.
I think that's right.
Yeah, there are just, you come up here to this part of the world, and there are just so many of these wonderful little rills and ridges. I better watch where I'm walking here. I don't want to fall down and kill myself. Does it surprise people, as it did me in a way, that you have an elevated lake? I mean, that's nothing abnormal, but when we came up the elevation, I was kind of surprised to see a lake up here.
Well, it's a little bit unusual because most people are used to the larger lakes, and around here we have a lot of the TVA lakes.
Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yes, and of course those are fed by the rivers, and they're usually in more low-lying areas. And some people are a little bit surprised to see a lake up here, as they say, on top of a mountain.
Mm-hmm. You know, maybe we should give a little bit of a history lesson here about the TVA. It would have been part of, I guess, the works projects that Roosevelt did in the 30s to get people out of the Depression to actually bring electricity to this part of America.
Right. They wanted to have a cheap source of electricity, and also be able to control flooding, which, of course, is not a problem in most places now because of the dams, but back before they built the dams, they had a lot of problems with flooding.
So they killed 2 birds with 1 stone. They fixed the flooding and generated electricity.
Yes, and of course now the lakes are big recreational areas that a lot of people in this area flock to in the summertime.
Well, now we've come to a fork in the road, so as Yogi Berra would say, we better take it. Which way do you want to go from here?
Well, let's peek over here first. We're here next to the bobcat habitat, and sometimes you can find these critters easily and sometimes you can't. I can see one. If you move over this way, you can see one watching us.
Oh, wow.
We have a couple of bobcats here in the habitat, 1 male, 1 female. The one that is looking at us now is the female. She's a little bit lighter colored than the male. I'm trying to look around the habitat and see.
There he is.
Yeah, I thought he might be over here under the trees, but he's not. So you can get a glimpse of both of them.
Now, if we had been in this part of the world a couple centuries ago, when people were first coming here, there would have been a lot of this type of animal here?
A lot of bobcats. If you had been here that long ago, you would have seen wolves, mountain lions, and of course a lot of the animals that are here now. We don't have the wolves around now. We don't have the mountain lions, but there are still quite a few bobcats around, which surprises most people because most people don't see them and hear them and think that they're kind of gone the way of the wolf, you know, and that they've sort of disappeared. But there are a lot of them around. Sometimes you'll hear them at night, And we get calls from people who say that they see them sometimes in the evenings, around their homes. And
also, Ken was pointing out the fact that there are still a lot of free-roaming bobcats and deer and even a wolf or two here in the area. I wonder if any of those animals ever encroached on civilization.
Rarely, because they're pretty secretive and for the most part stay out in the woods on their own. They're not usually prone to coming around houses.
They're gorgeous animals. Yeah, we had problems, and I live in Los Angeles, as many of my listeners know, that in the periphery we have a lot of mountains around L.A., and when we had drought and the habitat dried up, they were coming closer and closer to civilization because they could smell food in garbage cans, and there was a little bit of a danger there for a while.
Yeah, we don't seem to have that problem around here, especially with bobcats, and I think the main reason is because they're kind of secretive. And they're a little bit smaller. I think some people are kind of disappointed when they see them. They weigh about 25 or 30 pounds, which is a good-sized cat, but they're a little bit smaller than some people think, and they do have the bobtail or the little short tail that's about 3 or 4 inches long.
But in essence, when you say bobcat, they are just a big cat.
Yeah, they just look like a giant house cat almost.
Do they meow?
No, they don't.
They growl?
They do growl. And they don't do that much, though, but they do that occasionally. For the most part, they're pretty quiet.
I was at the San Diego Zoo a couple of years ago, and you come very, very close to the lions there. I don't know how they keep the separation. It was a big pit that they'd have to get across, but there was this huge lion came up and looking at the crowd, and it did that MGM. And when it opened up, the kids just jumped back about 10 feet. I mean, it was really loud.
The classic roar, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So what other animals do you have here? I did not know that this was also a little zoo.
We try to keep only animals that are either native to this area now or that were once here. And at the present time, we have the bobcats. We have some white-tailed deer, raccoons, river otters. We have an aviary with waterfowl in it with various kinds of ducks in it. And I thought we might take a walk out and see the habitat with the wolves in it.
Oh, great. Ken, what kind of regulation do places like this have? Are there federal laws about the care of animals? I mean, you look as if you do a wonderful job here, and I might point out that I'm not trying at all to be pejorative. I know people who deal with animals, the vast majority of them love the animals they work with, but is it a state standard for their health care? Is it a federal thing? How is that all handled?
Well, there are some of each. There are various permits and regulations that the state puts forth. And then quite a few that are put forth by the USDA arm of the federal government. And so we try to meet those guidelines, and we also try to provide habitats that are not only pleasing for you and I to look at, but pleasing for the animals to stay in. You notice back there where the bobcats were, there were a lot of trees in there, a lot of the green Christmas tree looking trees, which are hemlocks. And we left it that way on purpose because we wanted them to, first of all, feel at home, and second of all, be able to maybe hide if they wanted to, or kind of have a little place where they could get away from the people if they wanted a little quiet time.
Well, now this animal here looks like a twin brother to one that jumped over the hood of my car on a dark highway when I was in high school and scared me to death. What's the official name of this?
This is the white-tailed deer. There are two of them here close to us. The one on the left is the buck, which doesn't look much like a buck because he lost his antlers a couple of weeks ago. And then the one in front of us is the doe.
Do they shed the antlers? Is that the way that works?
They do. They shed their antlers each spring. If you look closely at his head, you'll see a couple of little circles there on top of his head that look like they have a little scab over them. And very soon that will start to grow, and by September he'll have a great big set of antlers.
Wow. Now, as the animal gets older, do the antlers become larger?
To some extent. Most of the deer with the biggest antlers, or racks as people call them, are about middle-aged. In other words, they're about 7, 8, maybe 9 years old.
Well, back to our tour now of Bays Mountain Park, just outside of Kingsport, Tennessee. Ken Childress, the naturalist, has been showing us a great deal of deer. Some have shed their antlers, some haven't. Well, now you see these wonderful classic photographs of rams who just ram each other when they're vying for the young lady in the area. Do deer do that also? Do they have combat?
They do that too. It's not so much the ramming, but more of a shoving match with where they kind of lock antlers and push and shove, and whoever gets tired and quits first loses, and he has to go find a territory some other place.
Do we still have a lot of deer around the U.S.? I know I've been in the Florida Keys, and there's what's called key deer, which are miniature, and they're trying to preserve those. There are very strict speed limits on Highway 1 because so many of them get run over.
Well, we have a lot around here, and I think probably most of the country is experiencing an increase in the deer population. I know in this area there are a lot more than there were. You know, around the turn of the century, deer were kind of scarce in most places because people had hunted them so heavily that they just almost disappeared. Now that most of the states, well, all the states have regulations on hunting, they've begun to come back. In some places there are so many that they're beginning to be pests.
Wow. Hey, Ken, what about you say hunting? I've never had deer meat. It's venison?
Mm-hmm.
What does it taste like?
It's pretty tasty. It's kind of like maybe a little bit sweeter version of beef. A lot of people like it. A lot of people around here like it and cook it up in various ways. Some people make it into, grind it and make it into a hamburger type consistency, and a lot of people fix stew with it. And a lot of people like to make it into jerky, which it makes a really good jerky.
Well, I know I had a conversation with my grandmother many years ago, and I was asking her how food was different, say, around the Depression than today, and she said, oh, everything's hamburger today, everything's hamburger. And she began to tell me the things that they used to eat on the farm, and they had a tremendous amount of deer, basically because it was available, and it was free if they could find it. Well, so it made good eating.
It is good. It is tasty, and
he's following us.
Pretty lean too. There's not a lot of fat on the deer meat.
Hi there. Hi.
He's afraid we're going to trespass on his territory.
Oh, I see.
So he's probably going to walk with us as we go down this way. He's very territorial, even when it's not mating season. He's going to follow us to make sure that we stay out here.
Have a name?
Well, not officially, but most people call him Bucky.
Hi, Bucky. Come on. Come on. The other thing, too, and maybe it's even though Los Angeles is cleaning up its act, after 2 years of living out there, I noticed one thing about this place. The air is wonderful here.
Yeah, we have nice air here. Most of our weather comes from the west, and if you're looking at a map and you look west of us, there's a lot of open space and a lot of mountains and not really that much habitation and civilization down that way. So our air is pretty good.
Well, I know you've got some gorgeous mountains, of course, here in the Smokies and Appalachia. Later today, I'm driving to Jackson, Tennessee, and I know there's that beautiful range you go over between Knoxville and Nashville. That's quite a hill. Yeah,
the plateau, the Cumberland Plateau. That's a real interesting area down there. And when you get to Jackson, that'll be a lot different than here.
Mm-hmm. Well, now here we're coming in on another fenced-in area. This says no feeding. What do we have back here?
This is the wolf habitat. What we'll do is look around and see how many we can find.
There's one, two.
We actually have 5.
3.
A pack of 5 who are living here in the habitat. There are 3 females, 2 males.
All right, I see 3. One over there, one here, and one here.
Okay.
But you've got some great shelters for them to hide in.
Yeah, and you know what? We went to a lot of trouble to build those, and they very seldom go in. They'd rather sit on top. Even if it's raining or snowing, they'd rather sit on top. They like to be up so that they can see out better and know what's going on around them. So back in the early part of the century, and it happened here and really over the entire country. People, they just saw the wolves as a bad thing, and they went about killing them out. And unfortunately, they did a really good job of it because they got rid of most of them.
Do you know how closely related a wolf is to the genus for the dog family? Because if I hadn't been told that was a wolf, the way it's looking from a distance, I thought it was a dog, or would have thought that.
Well, it has the same characteristics as dogs, and if you could stay out here for a long period of time and watch how they behave, especially how they behave with each other, you would see a lot of dog-like behaviors.
But that's
really... I should say that the other way around. I should say that the dogs have a lot of wolf-like behaviors because all of our dogs, great-great-great-great-granddad and grandma, thousands of years ago, were wolves. That's the ancestors of our pet dogs.
Oh, wow. Now, when that one wolf went into the shelter and turned around, I realized how big it is. What's something like that weigh?
I think the one you're looking at over there is the alpha male, who is the leader of the pack. He's the biggest one. He probably weighs about 115 pounds.
Big size animal.
Usually the males are a little bit bigger than the females. The females weigh about 90 pounds or so. They eat more in the wintertime. Of course, their coats enhance in the wintertime. In fact, these guys are getting ready to shed most of that down, that underfur that keeps them warm in the wintertime. The wolves really like the wintertime. I think if they could tell you their favorite season would be winter, and especially when it snows, they love to play in the snow.
Let me ask about the nature of wolves. Here's another species that's been overhunted that got some really bad publicity. I mean, the werewolfy kind of things. People are terrified of them. Am I not right in saying that wolves really, in a way, have gotten a bad rap over the years?
Well, they have, and a lot of it comes from centuries ago when... people thought that they were omens of the devil, and of course we've all read these stories, especially when we were children, about the big bad wolf and the three little pigs that had trouble with the wolves and Red Riding Hood and all that sort of thing. And what happened was people were just afraid of them, and some people thought, well, we better get rid of these guys or they might eat us up. And a lot of the problem was the hunters who figured that, well, if I'm going hunting for deer and the wolves are hunting for the same deer, if I get rid of the wolves, I'll have more deer to go hunting for.
I was hoping maybe to get a good howl out of them, but they look too content.
What I was thinking was that maybe before we get too far away from them, we could try to entice them to howl.
What do you do, throw meat?
Well, no, we'll try to throw our voice and pretend like we're a wolf.
Is that one?
No, I think that might be a visitor.
Oh.
But let's try right here before we get too far away.
All right.
And I'll just kind of step over to the side and see if I can pretend that I'm a wolf and howl a little bit. And then we'll watch and see if they answer.
Okay.
Now, sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. So we'll just have to give it a shot and see what they think about it.
Okay, now Ken's walking away, and we'll see what happens here. I'll play off stage. Here he goes. You know, Ken, that's interesting because he's howling, or she, but you can really tell that this and the dog have a common ancestor. It's more of a barking in a way.
Well, and if you listen carefully, you can hear different wolf voices. One has a real high-pitched voice. That's one of the females. The one that has a coarse voice is the alpha male. And the one that was doing the barking is the second-ranking male, and he barks when he gets excited. He's the only one that does that, though. The others don't do that.
So in a way, even though we look at, or many people have at wolves as being a nasty kind of animal, if you got to know them, they have different personalities.
They're just like people, and their social structure within the pack is very much like social activities between people.
Oh, neat. Okay, where's the lake? Down farther?
Okay, we'll go down this trail and...
Now we're on asphalt. I'm not as worried about falling.
We'll make a little turn to the right, and we'll be down by the lake in just a minute or so.
How many employees you have here? This is a lot to take care of.
Well, we have about 18 people who work here.
Let me let you put in a plug. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know everybody undergoes budget cuts, whether you work in private industry or for the federal government. They're always cutting back. I'm sure you guys have maybe 3 times more work to do than you did 10 years ago. But I really think that the national park system the Forest Service of the USDA and some of the other areas, that this is really an undiscovered part of America. There are places, albeit like Yellowstone and Yosemite, where you can't even drive anymore. I mean, people are just beating the doors down and they're overcrowded. But there are so many of these wonderful out-of-the-way places like this. What does it feel like to work here?
Well, the thing about places like this, and of course we're proud of Bays Mountain Park because that's where we work and live, but there are places like this all around the country, and a lot of these places are in folks' back doors, so to speak. And they're easy to get to. They're within a day's drive or less, and people just seem not to take advantage of things that are in their backyard, so to speak.
I hate to bring up this four-letter word, but it's fire. Do you have a tough fire season here? Do you have enough moisture that things don't get kindling dry?
Usually we don't worry about fire in the spring, although as you can see from walking around, it's pretty dry this spring. We haven't had nearly as much rain as we usually do. And although we've not had any fires here in the park for a number of years, there was a small forest fire about a couple of miles away, which happened a couple of weeks ago, but it never did make it into the park, and it was extinguished pretty quickly.
I have a vivid memory of my childhood driving through the Smokies, which I guess technically don't start for, what, about another 40 miles from here or so?
Yeah.
But of seeing this enormous black cloud, and I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and I asked my dad what it was, and he said, I think something's on fire. We came around on the top of a hill, and it was an absolute inferno. I mean, if the road had been much closer to it, I'm sure they would have closed the highway.
Yeah, we've been lucky in that we've not had any major fires up here. I don't know how long our luck will hold out. Hopefully it'll keep going, but...
Well, if you ever do, you got this great lake full of water here.
Yeah, and we'd probably have to make use of that, too.
We turned a corner just a moment ago, and we're looking down at a beautiful lake and reservoir that's nestled up here in the mountains. I asked Ken if this is used for recreation or strictly part of the water supply.
Pretty sparingly, because we consider the park and the lake and the park itself, we consider it a nature preserve. And so that means that we try to keep it as natural as possible. We do have a limited amount of fishing, and we do have a barge that we operate on weekends where we take people for rides out on the lake. We take them down to the far end where they don't normally get to and that sort of thing. But other than the barge rides and the limited fishing, that's about the extent of the use.
Well, this is so, I guess it's trite to use the word idyllic, but it's just so restful here. I can see some haggard businessman and his wife out here not really wanting to go home.
And we have some business people sometimes that come up for lunch. Since we're pretty close to town, they can come up and spend part of their lunch hour up here. It's pretty nice down here. There's usually a breeze. It's a small lake. You're seeing most of it from here, but not all of it. And it's been here a long time. The dam was built back in 1916, and since it's been here such a long time, even though technically it's a man-made lake, it is very much like a natural lake as far as the plants and animals that you see in it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have really known that this was dammed up. It looks so absolutely natural. Yeah. One final thing about getting here. We are in nearly extreme eastern Tennessee. It's amazing how wide Tennessee is. You can go from Washington, D.C. to the Mississippi River at Memphis and only go through 2 states, Virginia and Tennessee. But you're not only right here on the interstate, on 81, a very busy highway, but you're not that far from Johnson City. Great airport connections there.
Mm-hmm. We're in the area called the Tri-Cities, Johnson City, Bristol, and Kingsport. And anywhere in this area, any city that you're in, you're within, say, a 45-minute drive of Bays Mountain Park.
And, of course, the service has its own website.
Yes, we do. And a lot of people visit because they're going down the interstate and see the signs that say Bays Mountain Park and Planetarium, and they're curious about what that is, and they just come on up.
One final question. You see the name Eastman all around here. I guess that's part of the Eastman Kodak conglomerate. There's a big plant here. That seems to serve you well as far as the generosity of that company in contributing to a lot of things here.
They contributed a great deal when the park was first built back in the early 70s. And it's the largest employer in Kingsport, and in fact I think it's the largest employer in the state of Tennessee, so they do a great deal for the tax base here.
Well, Ken Childress, I want to thank you very much for showing us around. I could literally spend, well, the rest of my life here if I had the chance.
Well, that would be fine. Maybe you can visit again sometime.
Sure will, and thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
A spooky, wonderful, great place, Bays Mountain State Park. I'm Dennis Daly.